Since my divorce, I've been active on online forums like this and wanted to share my story. In many of these posts, I've come across guys making similar mistakes. While I'm not claiming to be perfect, I believe I handled my situation with strength and managed to regain the dignity and respect that my ex-wife attempted to take away from me. This all happened a little over 4 years ago. I was 46 at the time, and my wife, whom I'll refer to as Grace, was 44. We had been married for 23 years and had 2 wonderful daughters, aged 23 and 21. We got married at a young age due to our first child arriving 5 months early, so to speak. Before I discovered the cheating, if you had asked me to rate my marriage on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have given it an 11. Grace was a stay-at-home mom, and she excelled at it. Not only did she raise our daughters into fantastic young women, but she also managed our home and took excellent care of me. She was always there to support my career, which allowed us to have a wonderful family life. I genuinely felt like I had won the marriage lottery with her. Many of my friends weren't as fortunate and often seemed unhappy in their marriages. In my case, there were absolutely no signs of trouble in our relationship. I mean, none at all. Right up until shortly before I caught her cheating. When did it start? Well, after our daughters moved out, my wife suddenly had a lot of free time on her hands. At first, she used the extra time to volunteer at our church and spend more quality moments with our parents. She also contemplated taking on a part-time job, but she couldn't find one that truly interested her. However, one thing she persuaded me to do was adopt a puppy, whom I'll affectionately call Barky. Barky helped fill the void Grace felt after our daughters moved out. Dealing with a lively puppy like Barky initially demanded a lot of attention. Besides the regular tasks like walking, feeding, bathing, and vet visits, Grace had to house and obedience train him. She did an excellent job and appeared to genuinely enjoy having Barky around, as did I. Except for the time he decided to chew up one of my pairs of shoes and a favorite belt. Our physical intimacy remained consistent, although it had slowed down somewhat over the years. Nevertheless, we still managed to be intimate a few times a week, which was respectable for a couple who had been together for over 26 years. The first hint that something was wrong occurred when my wife stopped initiating physical intimacy. Normally, we both took the initiative, but she stopped doing so a few weeks before I discovered her infidelity. In all other aspects of our married life, Grace continued to be her loving self. She would kiss me goodbye when I left for work and greet me with a kiss upon my return home. We'd cuddle during the evening, and she always wanted to snuggle in bed. Nothing seemed unusual, except she appeared even more affectionate during that period. Let's fast forward to the day when my suspicions of her infidelity first arose. It was around 2:30 p.m. and I needed a break from my office work. I had been immersed in a report without any breaks, so I decided to head home for an hour to spend some time with my wife before returning to the office, feeling rejuvenated and ready to finish the report. On my way home, I found myself waiting at a red light at the end of our street. The intersection provided a view up the street toward our house. It's a notoriously busy intersection, and the red light seemed to take an eternity to change, usually keeping you waiting for 4 to 5 minutes. On that day, it was no different. As I sat there, I noticed my wife walking from around the side of a house down the street from ours. I was somewhat acquainted with the family that lived there, but we didn't know each other very well. The husband had a trade business in town, and we happened to be one of his customers. I won't disclose his specific profession to protect their privacy. Also, he, his wife, and their kids were part of our church community. Seeing my wife approaching our house, I pulled over to the curb, rolled down my window, and jokingly asked her, "Where have you been?" It was meant to be a lighthearted comment, but her response was far from what I had expected. Instead of a warm, "I'm excited to see you" look, I received an expression that seemed to say, "Oh no, I've been caught." When she got into the car, she appeared anxious and mentioned that their dog had escaped and was running up the street. She claimed to have caught the dog and led it back to their house while holding its collar. This struck me as odd because their dog, an 18-year-old collie mix I'll refer to as Lady, could barely walk, let alone run. So I asked my wife if they had gotten a new dog, to which she hesitated and replied that it was indeed Lady. Grace nervously chuckled and commented on how she had never seen Lady move so quickly. I then inquired about Barky's whereabouts, and she assured me he was at home. However, it was unusual because she usually took Barky with her on walks. Additionally, I noticed a strong scent of Old Spice or something similar on her. She explained it away, saying, "Yeah, that guy really douses himself in it." Let's call the man in question Tad and his wife Marcia. I asked her how she ended up with that scent on her, and she mentioned she might have brushed against Tad when handing Lady over to him. I also asked if Marcia was at home, and she replied that she didn't know. When we arrived home, she seemed jittery and began talking rapidly about various topics. I couldn't stand the cologne smell, and I told her to take a shower, mentioning that it was bothering her too. She went in for a quick shower, came out wrapped in a towel, and spent some time talking with me before I headed back to work. At this point, my intuition was on high alert, and I could sense that something was amiss. Then, a piece of evidence surfaced that solidified my suspicions. Before leaving for the office, I went to use the bathroom, the same one she had just showered in. As I went to wash my hands, I noticed that the hand soap dispenser was empty. I had to open the lower cabinet to fetch another bottle, and there, I spotted a pair of her underwear at the back of the cabinet draping over a shampoo bottle. When I reached back and picked them up, I realized they were wet and carried the scent of shampoo, as if they had just been washed and discreetly stashed there. The meaning of this discovery was not lost on me. I quietly placed them back on the shampoo bottle and closed the cabinet. My emotions were running high, and I felt a surge of anger, a burning desire to confront the situation. But I managed to keep my composure. Instead, I swiftly left and returned to work. When I came home that evening, I embarked on my investigation. While Grace was occupied in the kitchen, I discreetly checked her phone, finding nothing suspicious. Then, I delved into the 7-day archive of our doorbell camera footage. Upon reviewing the footage, I uncovered that during 3 of the past 7 days, Grace had left the house without Barky and remained gone for over an hour. This was highly unusual, as she never went on walks of that duration, and her friends were typically not home during the day. It was clear to me that she was meeting with Tad, but I needed solid evidence to confront her. The idea of hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but the online listings were overwhelming, leaving me unsure of whom to choose. Then I recalled a coworker whose father was a retired police officer that had dabbled in private investigation work after leaving the force. I had played in a golf outing with him once, and he seemed like a trustworthy individual. I reached out to my coworker to inquire if his father was still involved in PI work, but he informed me that his dad had fully retired a few years back. He inquired if I required any PI services, and I mentioned that I had a potential project in mind. He suggested that I should have a conversation with his father, whom I'll refer to as Frank, as he might offer valuable guidance. Frank called me later that day, and I shared my predicament with him. To my surprise, he expressed his willingness to help and insisted on not receiving payment. He mentioned that he enjoyed such work, especially since it got him out and about, which he missed. Frank went on to explain that he had stopped taking PI assignments a few years ago due to the extensive vehicle travel involved, which he wasn't keen on at his age of 82. I must say, he looked no older than 70. Given that my case seemed to revolve around the same street, he assured me that handling my job would be straightforward. I offered to pay him, and he accepted the arrangement. The next morning, Frank began his surveillance on our street, which continued throughout the week. However, he reported back with no significant findings. The only activity he observed was Grace walking Barky a few times daily. Frank advised me to be patient, explaining that my wife might have become more cautious after my near discovery. He assured me that based on his experience, people usually crack under such circumstances. During this time, my wife behaved as usual, and I managed to hide my anger while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Nevertheless, I chose to cease all forms of intimacy with her and avoided displaying affection whenever possible. At night, I intentionally sat in a chair instead of on the couch to prevent her from snuggling with me. I also adjusted my sleeping position in bed, turning to my left side and facing away from her, using the excuse of a sore back to discourage her from spooning with me. The next week arrived, and Frank reported seeing nothing unusual on Monday or Tuesday. Doubts started creeping in, making me wonder if it was all in my imagination. However, on Wednesday, as I was driving home, I received a call from Frank. He had something to show me, and it wasn't good news. According to him, Tad had returned home and parked in his garage around 2 p.m. Just 10 minutes later, my wife walked over and entered the back door of Tad's home. She stayed there for a little over an hour before returning to our house. Frank had captured video footage of Tad entering his house and of my wife quickly sneaking in and out. We met in a restaurant parking lot down the street, where he showed me these troubling videos. Frank proposed that he continue monitoring her activities for the remainder of the week, and I agreed. She repeated the same behavior on Thursday. During dinner with Grace on Wednesday and Thursday evenings, I asked her about her day. She only mentioned doing housework and walking Barky. This confirmation solidified my decision to divorce her swiftly and catch her off guard. On Friday, I sought out the best lawyer available, who took my case, and I provided him with the evidence Frank had gathered. The attorney explained that our state follows at-fault divorce laws, which favor the aggrieved party. He noted that although the videos and pictures weren't 100% conclusive proof of my wife's infidelity, they strongly indicated it. He expressed confidence that this evidence would likely exempt me from paying alimony. The attorney did mention, however, that I would need to divide any assets acquired during our marriage. I conveyed to him that while I wasn't thrilled about parting with 50% of my wealth, I was willing to accept it because Grace had been an excellent wife and mother until the point when she cheated on me. As fate would have it, I managed to obtain more conclusive evidence of her affair with Tad just 2 days later. I arrived home from work a bit early, and my wife informed me that she needed to make a quick trip to the store to pick up a few items, including sweet corn for our dinner. When she left, I changed out of my work attire and was in the process of placing my shirt in the laundry basket when I noticed a pair of her panties beside the basket. It seemed she had intended to toss them in, but missed. Now here's the unsettling part where I nearly lost my composure. When I picked up the underwear, I discovered they were damp in the crotch area and carried the distinct scent of both male and female bodily fluids. Instead of feeling sad or angry, it was as if I had struck gold. I quickly grabbed a plastic freezer bag and carefully placed the underwear inside. Then, I took the bag to the trunk of my car. Afterward, I washed my hands thoroughly with Dawn and baking soda using the hottest water I could tolerate. Grace returned and started preparing dinner, completely unaware of my discovery. In hindsight, I'm not entirely sure how I managed to get through dinner without confronting her, but I made a conscious effort to keep my emotions in check. After dinner, I even assisted her with the dishes. Later in the evening, I sat in the living room, working on my laptop, with a view of the kitchen and the laundry room. Grace entered the laundry room to start a load of laundry. I observed her from the corner of my eye as she anxiously searched for those underwear. She looked under the washer, then under the dryer, checked the shelves and the floor, and even pulled out the units to inspect behind them. She continued down the hall, seemingly in pursuit of those missing underwear. Eventually, she gave up in frustration and joined me in the living room. As I sat there, it struck me that at that very moment, my wife was carrying another man's DNA within her. It also became clear that she intended to wash those soiled underwear along with my clothes in the same laundry. The level of disgust I felt in that moment was overwhelming, and it fueled a deep resentment towards her that still lingers to this day. She utterly revolts me. Despite the many wonderful years we had shared, I will forever associate her with the betrayal and disrespect, and nothing else. The following day, I shared with my attorney what I had discovered. He advised me to hold on to the panties, as we might require them as evidence in court if my wife were to dispute the allegation of her infidelity. He mentioned that he would discuss the matter of the underwear during pre-trial discussions with her counsel once she obtained legal representation. He suggested that simply informing her that we possessed the article would probably be sufficient to dissuade her from contesting the claim. Now, it was merely a matter of waiting for my attorney to prepare the divorce papers so that I could confront my wife. In the interim, I confided in my parents, brother, and his wife about the situation. Their reaction was unsurprising: disbelief. They couldn't fathom that Grace could be involved in such a situation. They offered their assistance in any way they could. I expressed my desire for all of them to be present when I confronted Grace, and they readily agreed. When the day of the confrontation arrived, I asked my wife to invite our parents, brother, and sister-in-law over for coffee, as we hadn't seen them in a few weeks. She agreed enthusiastically, and mentioned she'd prepare some special desserts for the occasion. Upon returning home that evening, Grace and I had dinner and tidied up. Then she set the table with her desserts and brewed a large pot of coffee. Everyone arrived well before the appointed time and took their seats in the dining room. My nerves were on edge. As we gathered around the table, Grace served coffee and desserts to everyone. For a brief moment, I felt guilty about what I was about to do, but that sensation quickly faded. After everyone had been served, I informed the group that I had a surprise for my wife. She looked at me with affection in her eyes, anticipating a special announcement. I'll never forget that expression for as long as I live. I then proceeded to reveal that I knew about her month-long affair with Tad, whose last name I mentioned. My family sat in silence, while Grace's parents were utterly speechless. Initially, Grace attempted to feign ignorance, asking me to clarify what I meant. Soon after, Tears welled up in her eyes, and she vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming it was all a colossal misunderstanding. I informed her that a private investigator had been meticulously tracking her activities for the past month, perhaps with a bit of exaggeration, but the point was made. I then revealed the existence of multiple videos capturing her clandestine visits to and from Tad's residence. In response, Grace offered an explanation, asserting that she had been going there to assist him with his dog. I pressed her to clarify why she had been alone with a male neighbor inside his home without his wife present, and without informing me. I repeated my request for an explanation, and her response was a stammered attempt to conjure something plausible. She eventually broke down into heavy sobs, insisting that it wasn't what it appeared to be. I played my trump card, revealing that I had found a pair of her soiled underwear and had them subjected to testing. I stated that the results showed the presence of another man's DNA, not mine. While I may have stretched the truth a bit, it had the desired effect. She shifted from claiming a misunderstanding to apologizing profusely and begging for my forgiveness. Her lies and the attempt to gaslight me were repulsive. Amid her sobbing and with her hands folded as if in prayer, she looked at me, imploring me for leniency. I remained silent. This continued for several minutes until she lowered her head onto the table and continued to cry. Her mother approached to comfort her. I then informed my parents, brother, and sister-in-law that it was time for us to leave. Grace, with a tearful gaze, inquired about my intentions, and I conveyed that I was moving out until our divorce was finalized. At that moment, her tears flowed as if she were enduring unbearable torture, and once again she laid her head down on the table. My sister-in-law, Sael, then joined her mother in consoling her and guided her back to our master bedroom. Her father turned to me, utterly bewildered, and asked, "What in the world just happened here?" He couldn't fathom the situation and began apologizing profusely to me. My Sil emerged from the bedroom and proposed that we depart, with her remaining behind to offer support to Grace and her parents, ensuring everything was okay. My CIL holds a special place in my heart, like an older sister, and I deeply appreciated the assistance provided by her, my brother, and my parents as I navigated my divorce. I spent the night at my parents' house, and the following morning I reached out to my daughters to share the news. I disclosed every detail. They reacted with shock and sadness, struggling to comprehend how their own mother could engage in such behavior, especially with Mr. last name. Of all people, they were acquainted with his children and were profoundly upset by the entire situation. They mentioned their intent to call her together after our conversation, expressing their desire to express their anger and potentially sever ties with her forever. In fact, I conveyed my support and pride in them for taking such a stance, which they ultimately did. The next day, I noticed 7 missed calls from Tad's business line. At that point, I surmised that my wife had alerted him, and he was likely attempting to contact me to prevent me from informing his wife. This only intensified my frustration. Therefore, that afternoon, I visited the insurance agency office where Marcia was employed to have a conversation with her. I have my homeowner's insurance policy with that agency, so when I arrived, the agent assumed I had a policy-related question. Fortunately, the office was empty, so I asked if she had a few minutes for a private conversation. She agreed, confirming there were no other staff members present. Without beating around the bush, I broke the news to her. Initially, she found it hard to believe, but when I showed her the videos, she began to cry. I then informed her that my wife had already confessed to the affair and disclosed that it had been occurring at their house for approximately a month. Again, she expressed disbelief, but mentioned that she had detected an unusual perfume-like scent in their bedroom recently. I explained that it was likely my wife's perfume. I also shared a similar experience when my wife came home one day smelling of cheap cologne. Curious about my plans, she inquired, and I revealed my intention to file for divorce. Upon hearing this, she burst into tears once more, stating that she couldn't believe this was happening. She confided that she might consider a similar course of action, but needed time to think it over. I mentioned that her husband had tried calling me 7 times that morning, implying that he probably knew the affair had been exposed. She indicated that she would be leaving soon to confront him. We exchanged gratitude, swapped our cell numbers, and I left with mixed feelings. Some sense of accomplishment, but also a profound sense of sympathy for her and her children. She is a genuinely kind person who dedicates a considerable amount of her time to volunteer work at our church. Neither she nor I deserved this situation, but sometimes life deals you a difficult hand, and you have to play it. I stayed with my parents for the next few weeks, but then decided to get a little furnished apartment near my office as both my parents' and brother's homes are nearly an hour away from place of business. From the day I confronted her until the day our divorce was final, Grace tried endlessly to get me to reconsider. She said she would agree to anything if I would stay, but I refused any and all offers. My attorney advised me to avoid having discussions with her, and if I did, to record each call and advise up front that I would be doing so. So, that's what I did. If she left me a message or texted me regarding our relationship, I just ignored her. But if it was something about the house or our kids, I talked to her. Inevitably, on each of these calls, she turned into a sobbing, groveling mess. Each time I ended up sternly telling her reconciliation was never going to happen and she should take that possibility off the table. After multiple calls like this, one day I reached a breaking point and told her she should pursue a relationship with Tad now as they both will soon be free. She cried and told me not to say that. She said she hated him and wants nothing to do with him. I said, how can then be so? When she risked our marriage and future together just to have sex with him, she just cried and said she doesn't know and to please never mention him again as she wanted to die for what she did. She told me I was her whole world and she really didn't have anything else worth continuing on for except our kids. I told her she should have thought about that before cheating. Our divorce was eventually concluded and it was civil, though not without some last-minute drama. During the courtroom proceedings, my wife requested to speak, which seemed to catch her attorney off guard. She turned towards me and expressed her desire to apologize on the record for her actions and to thank me for the wonderful life I had provided her. She mentioned her eternal love for me and expressed hope for forgiveness and friendship in the future. In response, I simply said, "Thank you, Grace," and turned to face the judge. While forgiveness may be unlikely, I did appreciate her statement. The judge inquired if I had anything else to add, to which I replied in the negative. He then proceeded to make his final decision, which aligned with what my attorney had anticipated. No alimony and a fair division of our marital assets. So that's how I navigated this situation. It's crucial to maintain self-respect, exhibit strength, and uphold your values. I had made it clear to Grace from the beginning of our relationship that infidelity was a non-negotiable boundary for me. She had expressed the same commitment, but she repeatedly crossed that line and knew the consequences. While I hadn't anticipated being single at this stage of life, I am content with where I am now and harbor no regrets. Final update. Hello, everyone. Considering the responses I received to my initial post, I thought it would be fitting to provide an update. My life is currently in a great place. Following the divorce, I purchased a new home closer to my workplace and invested a considerable amount of time remodeling and painting the interior to suit my preferences. Both of my daughters are doing well. They have graduated from college, and my eldest is set to get married this summer. I'm looking forward to welcoming her fiancé into our family, as he's a dependable guy. As for my ex-wife, Grace, it seems she's adjusting to her new life. After we sold the house, she lived with her parents for about 6 months and has recently moved into her own apartment. She also found a job at Safeway, working in one of the departments there. According to my daughters, she genuinely enjoys her job, and it has significantly improved her overall mood. Regarding my own dating life, I've re-entered the scene and am currently seeing the real estate agent I worked with when purchasing my house. She, too, is divorced with 2 kids, and her marriage ended due to similar circumstances as mine. Like me, she has no interest in remarriage. We simply enjoy spending time together, and our physical connection is quite strong, as expected in a new romantic relationship. As for Grace, she hasn't embarked on the dating scene yet. She has informed my daughters and my parents that she has no intention of entering a new relationship with another man. Instead, she has expressed her hope that one day we might reconcile. She mentioned that until that day arrives, Barky will remain the only male companion she has in her life. Although I'm genuinely pleased to see her adapting to her new circumstances and wish for her happiness, I have no intention of reconciling with her after what she put me through. In situations where we need to interact, such as my daughter's wedding, I plan to maintain a courteous and polite demeanor, but aside from that, I intend to limit our communication. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who commented here, and I'm pleased that my post served as a source of inspiration for several of you who are dealing with similar situations. To those who reached out suggesting that I might have toxic traits or self-esteem issues, I can assure you that's not the case. I do view myself as a strong, masculine individual with a successful career, and I take pride in being self-reliant and confident. I consider these qualities to be positive attributes. If you have a different perspective, that's your prerogative.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
I'm a 32-year-old male, and I've been in a relationship with my wife, who is 31 years old, for a total of 11 years, with 8 of those years being in marriage. We initially met during our college days and began dating about halfway through our college journey. After we graduated, we moved in together and navigated through all the challenges and joys of our postgraduate life side by side. She made those years much more manageable for me. As soon as both of us secured good jobs and had stable incomes, I proposed to her. I had a strong desire to marry her and spend the rest of my life with her. She accepted my proposal, and shortly thereafter we got married and embarked on building a happy life together. We share a child, and we also purchased our first home in the suburbs. It was the kind of life we had always envisioned. Both my wife and I are committed and diligent workers, which led to us receiving numerous promotions and opportunities within our respective careers over the years. About a year ago, my wife earned a significant promotion at work, which granted her a personal office and an assistant. I attended all the office gatherings and parties with her. It was a close-knit work environment with all the employees. As time passed, we lost touch with most of our college friends, but we formed a pleasant circle of friends among our coworkers. One day, completely out of the blue, I received a text message from one of her coworkers, someone I considered a good friend, informing me that my wife might have engaged in inappropriate behavior with an intern. I was utterly taken aback by this news, and initially found it hard to believe. When my wife returned home, I showed her the message and asked her about it. She assured me that she had no idea what her coworker was referring to, but she intended to speak with him first thing the next morning to clarify the situation. She was concerned about the possibility of a false sexual harassment case or any similar issue arising. She felt quite distressed by the message, making it challenging to determine if she was being truthful. I leaned towards believing her because she had never given me any reason to doubt her throughout our entire relationship. When she returned home the next day, she informed me that she had a conversation with her coworker, and he explained what had occurred. He believed he had witnessed them in a compromising situation through her window, but she clarified that they were merely sitting close while she was assisting him with something on the computer. The intern even confirmed this, reassuring the coworker that nothing inappropriate was happening. I felt relieved that it seemed the issue had been resolved. I didn't suspect my wife of cheating on me, but it was reassuring to know that she had addressed the matter with her coworker. Several weeks later, my office granted all employees a 4-day weekend for building renovations. I had that Monday off and thought it would be a nice surprise to bring lunch to my wife at work. I stopped by her favorite restaurant, ordered her usual meal, and headed to her office. Along the way, I bumped into a few of her coworkers, and we chatted for a couple of minutes before I proceeded to my wife's office. I had visited her office many times before, and typically I would knock a couple of times and then peek inside. However, this time I found the door locked. I assumed she was in a meeting of some sort and didn't want any interruptions. However, I heard some movement on the other side of the door, and my wife asked for a moment. I patiently waited for her to open the door, and when she did, I noticed a young man behind her desk with a chair next to hers. My wife introduced me to her intern, and I immediately noticed that he had flushed cheeks and his hands were resting on his groin. Considering the accusations from her coworker, I found it surprising that she would be in such close quarters with her intern behind a locked door. I definitely had some concerns at that moment. I informed my wife that I had brought her lunch, and she thanked me, sending her intern off for an early lunch. I inquired about why the door was locked, and she explained that she hadn't realized it was locked and must have bumped it. She mentioned it was one of those push-button locks, so it made some sense. The intern quickly left the office, and I had lunch with my wife. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had interrupted something. The intern's demeanor had seemed quite suspicious, especially considering what her coworker had told me. It seemed reasonable to question what I had witnessed. Later that night, my wife called and informed me that she had a last-minute Zoom meeting with overseas clients and would be coming home late. This was a rare occurrence for her, as she was usually very busy at work, and last-minute events like this didn't typically happen. I became even more suspicious about what was happening. I thought about my next steps for a while, and eventually I contacted the coworker who informed me about the intern. When I called him and asked for specifics on what he saw, he hinted that he thought he saw my wife engaging in intimate activities with the intern, or at least in a position suggesting such. I inquired about the alleged last-minute meeting, and he expressed doubts about its existence. It seemed he sensed my suspicion regarding what might have happened between my wife and the intern that night. It's important to note that this coworker was next in line for the promotion my wife received. I understood that his statements should be taken with caution because his motives might not have been entirely genuine. However, if what he claimed was true, I needed to investigate further. He offered to meet me at the office since he had clearance. I agreed, and we met there about 15 minutes later. He escorted me to their offices, where we could hear someone engaged in very loud, intimate activities. Even without seeing them, I knew it was my wife. I recognized those sounds. Nevertheless, we proceeded toward them to catch them in the act. I found my wife at her desk with the intern. When I opened the door, they quickly separated and attempted to cover themselves. My wife struggled to find the words to explain the situation, but couldn't. I regretted not having any documented evidence, but fortunately, I had another witness with me. So hopefully, they could testify in the divorce proceedings that my wife was indeed cheating on me. I left the office in anger and went home, locking myself in the bedroom to avoid my wife. The following day, I contacted the coworker who accompanied me to the office, and he informed me that he was reporting the incident to HR. Later that day, I overheard my wife receiving a call, and it was evident that she was terminated. She appeared deeply upset by the conversation. The intern was also let go from the office. When I asked the coworker about the consequences for him, he explained that he likely wouldn't receive credit for the internship and might have to retake the course. While this wasn't the harshest punishment for him, I couldn't help but feel that my wife had an advantage in her position and might have taken advantage of it. In the end, I proceeded with divorcing my wife, and with the testimony of the person who witnessed the cheating, I didn't have to give her anything in the divorce settlement. She lost her job, her husband, her house, and now has limited custody of our child, all because of a meaningless affair with her intern.